40 million victims, a $150 billion industry. This is modern-day slavery. Most of the proceeds from this $150 billion industry flow through financial services. Under global anti-money laundering laws and regulations, financial institutions should identify and report suspicious activity associated with proceeds from human trafficking, including direct banking relationships, indirect banking relationships, correspondent banking relationships, and U.S. dollar clearing. But specifically, where is the risk? What jurisdictions? What industries? Potentially every country in the world has exposure to human trafficking and slavery risk in industries with many workers and little regulation, including agriculture and fishing, domestic work, construction, extractives, oil and mining, prostitution, and sexual exploitation. Let's look at the fishing industry, which spans many geographic regions. If a Southeast Asian-based fishery decides it wants to charter vessels to fish in New Zealand waters, it will first contact a financial institution for funding. Once the bank agrees, that money is used to contract a local New Zealand corporate to charter fishing vessels. If forced labor is later proved, this is where culpability gets complicated. While the local Southeast Asian-based corporate owns the boats and provides both funding and crew, New Zealand corporates are also accountable because they hold the charter agreement. They also agreed to the partnership in the first place. Once the charter agreement is in place, the Southeast Asian-based company must find a way to supply crew for its vessels. Usually this occurs through a local manning agent in a country where recruitment is easy and people are desperate to find work. In this hypothetical case, men were recruited by Filipino, Indonesian, and Taiwanese recruiting agencies to work on the Southeast Asian-based company's fishing vessels, traveling for work to New Zealand through major hubs like Singapore. Promised a well-paying job with money that will provide for their families, the men sign multiple contracts, many times in languages they do not understand. Recruiters provide the men with fake or forged visas. You must pay me for your work papers or hand over your property as collateral, the recruiter says, as he takes money from the men, and then work off your debt if you cannot pay. Little do the men know what awaits them on board. Once at sea, the men are forced into working conditions that often result in bodily injury and are made to work long hours with little to no sleep. With no medical care, the men are left to suffer. Still others aren't allowed to even leave the boat, and with their passports taken by the recruiter or captain, leaving may result in their own arrest and deportation. The men receive nothing for their hard work, or if they do receive payment, it is far below what they were promised. If they try to return home, they are threatened or forced to pay up because they did not pay off their debt. Sometimes physically and mentally abused, they experience further problems when they try to return home. Though the men do not receive payment, the companies involved still generate revenue from the fish caught on these slave-manned vessels. In this hypothetical case, the catch is processed and distributed by the New Zealand company into supermarkets and the supply chain worldwide, leading to further risk for banks who may do business with larger companies in the supply chain. The Southeast Asian-based company then receives money generated from the fish caught on these vessels. The payment is often in U.S. dollars, the predominant currency of trade, leading to further risk for banks. Singapore, New Zealand, the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Taiwan, the UK, the US. All jurisdictions that played a role in this case of modern-day slavery. Funding requests, payment, revenue are all areas of risk. Hundreds of men suffering horrific abuses on board ships, fishing for hours at a time and supplying fish into supermarkets worldwide. The import of fish caught by slaves into the UK and US may be a breach of the UK's Modern Slavery Act, the UK Criminal Finances Act of 2017, the US's California Transparency and Supply Chains Act, and the U.S. Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act of 2015. How can we combat this $150 billion crime? running adverse media checks, filing suspicious transaction reports, and not doing business with those who profit from slavery. This is how to disrupt the environment in which slavery thrives. As William Wilberforce once said about slavery, "You may choose to look the other way, but you can never say again that you did not know."